In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. The sun hung low in the vast Wyoming sky, casting long golden rays across the scrubland. Heat shimmered off the dirt road leading into Barlow Creek, a settlement so small and silent it barely breathed, nestled in the crook of nowhere and almost nothing. A dry wind picked up dust from the earth and spun it into lazy spirals, as if even the breeze lacked the will to move too fast. The auction yard at the edge of town was unusually full for a Friday. Weathered men and tough women gathered under wide hats and behind squinting eyes, murmuring to each other about the sudden appearance of fresh horses and human chattel. Among them stood a woman who didn't quite belong, but who held her ground. With the same quiet grit as any pioneer who had outlasted a prairie winter. Her name was Eliza Cordell, and she was 6 months pregnant. Eliza stood alone by the fence rail, one hand resting on the small of her back, the other shading her brow as she watched the auctioneer lead another sorry-looking horse into the pen. Her eyes weren't on the animal. She was waiting. For what, she couldn't say, only that something inside her insisted she stay. That the answer to her unspoken need would arrive today. A long scar ran from her temple to the corner of her jaw, faded now but still noticeable. Her hair was pulled into a no-nonsense bun beneath a frayed bonnet, and her dress bore the marks of travel and labor. Yet there was something about her, a fierce, quiet strength that made people think twice before dismissing her. The auctioneer cleared his throat and gestured toward the next pair, being led into the enclosure. Last lot for the day, folks. 1 man, 1 horse. Damaged goods, both of them. Let's start the bidding at $10. Eliza's eyes snapped to the gate. The man was tall. His shirt was ragged and blood-stained, his face shadowed by a battered hat that barely concealed the bruises. One arm hung uselessly at his side. He walked stiffly, but with a kind of defiance that made you wonder what he'd do if he ever got his strength back. He didn't look up, didn't speak, and even when the auctioneer goaded him with a slap to the back, he didn't flinch. His horse limped beside him. It was a gray mare, ribs visible through a dust-caked coat, one leg wrapped in a makeshift splint. Her eyes, though, were wide and intelligent. She stuck close to the man as if he were the only thing tethering her to the world. The crowd murmured. Mute. They say, someone whispered. Hasn't spoken a word since they found him out past the divide, riding double on that mare, half dead. Some say he killed the men who took his voice. Some say he just watched. Eliza didn't blink. Her fingers closed around the edge of the fence. $10. Who'll give me 10? The auctioneer barked. No one moved. 8 then, 7, 6. Silence. The man stood in the pen like a broken fence post, battered by time and weather, but unbowed. The horse shifted uneasily beside him. $5 for the pair? Eliza. Step forward. 3. The auctioneer blinked. You offering $3, miss? I am, she said. And I'll throw in a bag of oats and a blanket. He looked around, hoping for a better offer. There was none. Sold, he shouted, too loud. To the lady with the big heart and the small wallet. Some folks laughed. Others looked away. Eliza stepped into the pen and approached the man slowly. He raised his head. His eyes were clear and piercing, a cold blue that reminded her of melted ice. She offered her hand. Name's Eliza Cordell. I own a little patch of land east of here. You're welcome to stay. Work if you can. Rest if you need. The man looked at her hand, then at her face. He didn't take it. Didn't nod. Didn't do anything but stared at Eliza. Dropped her hand. Suit yourself. She took the horse's reins and started toward the gate. After a moment, she heard footsteps behind her. He was following. Back at her wagon, she offered him water. He drank. She offered him food. He ate slowly, deliberately, without lifting his eyes. She waited until the sun dipped below the hills, then said, You got a name? He looked at her, then at the horse. Eliza sighed. You talk at all? He shook his head. Can you write? Pause, then a slow nod. She handed him a piece of paper and a pencil. He wrote in blocky letters, call on Colt. Eliza raised an eyebrow. That your name or the horse's? He wrote again. Mine, she's Clover. She smiled faintly. Well, Colt, welcome to the ranch. He blinked. It ain't much, she added. But it's quiet, and the work's honest. Colt nodded once. That night, Eliza laid awake in her wagon, staring at the canvas roof, one hand on her belly. The child inside her kicked, strong and insistent. She thought of the man sleeping by the dying fire, of the haunted look in his eyes, of the way Clover had leaned into him when she handed him the brush. There was more to this than a rescue. She knew it in her bones. Outside, a coyote howled, and Colt, lying in the dirt beneath the stars, opened his eyes wide to the sky, listening to the sound of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The road back to Eliza's ranch stretched across dust-bitten hills and valleys, speckled with dying sagebrush and wind-worn rocks. She rode slowly, holding the reins in one hand, the other steady on her belly. The wagon creaked behind her, its canvas top swaying gently as Colt walked silently beside it, leading Clover. The Mari limped, but she moved with a quiet dignity that echoed her riders. They reached the property by dusk. It wasn't much: a modest house with a stoop, a barn with one good stall and two falling in, a small paddock with broken fencing, and a garden out back, currently strangled with weeds. But it was hers, paid for with sweat, blood, and the remnants of a dead man's name she no longer claimed. Her boots hit the ground first, and she turned to Colt. You sleep in the barn. There's straw and an old cot that should do. Water pumps. Out back, don't expect me to wait on you. You got your hands, and I saw enough sense in you to know how to use them. He nodded once and led Clover toward the barn without hesitation. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was a kind of language. She appreciated that. Inside, the house still smelled of ashes and memory. She sat on the edge of her bed and removed her boots slowly, rubbing her swollen ankles. The child within her stirred, and she whispered, soon now. Just hold on a little longer. That night, she dreamed of fire. The next morning, she found him already at work. He'd fetched water, cleaned Clover's wound, and stacked the woodpile higher than she'd ever managed on her own. When she approached, he stopped, wiped his brow, and gestured toward the fence. It had been mended. Eliza narrowed her eyes. You fix that? He nodded. Double quotes by yourself. He nodded again. She stared a moment, then offered a slow nod. Good. Tomorrow we start on the roof. He wrote something on the back of an old envelope and handed it to her. Tools? Nails? Need a ladder, she pointed. To the shed. Help yourself. They settled into a rhythm. Eliza planted the garden again, now free from the memory of what had once grown there with someone else. Colt tended the animals, repaired what was broken, and built a new corral by hand. He never spoke, but sometimes he hummed under his breath low. Strange notes that seemed too old to belong to any song she knew. At night, he sat by the fire and carved things. Small animals out of old wood. Tiny horses, a wolf, a hawk. He left them on her stoop without explanation. She didn't ask why. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the whole sky the color of an open wound, Eliza found herself watching him longer than she intended. His face, though worn, had a kind of timelessness about it. Not handsome, exactly, but unforgettable. Like a story passed down in whispers. She brought out a tin plate with cornbread and beans. Figured you wouldn't come asking, so here. He nodded in thanks but didn't eat. She frowned. You fasting for something? He shook his head, then slowly picked up the tin and took a bite. You from back east? She asked, sitting on the stoop nearby. No reply. She sighed. You ever gonna talk, even a little? He stared into the fire. "Fine," she muttered. "Suit yourself." As she stood, he reached for the tin again. Scratched something into the dirt beside him. Throat crushed. Years ago. Her breath caught. She lowered herself back onto the stoop. "Crushed how?" Colt hesitated, then added another word. Rope. Understanding settled like a stone in her chest. "They hang you?" He didn't move, just stared ahead. "And you lived?" He nodded once. Eliza folded her arms over her belly. The baby kicked. She winced. "You want the truth?" she said, not expecting an answer. "I didn't just buy you out of pity. Didn't just see a poor soul and think, oh, I ought to help. No. I saw something. In your eyes. The same thing I see when I look in the mirror. Somebody who survived something they weren't meant to." Colt didn't look at her, but he reached beside him and picked up one of the wooden carvings. A bear. He held it out to her. She took it without a word. That night it stormed. Lightning split the sky. Thunder cracked the silence, and rain came. Down like judgment, Eliza sat up in bed, heart pounding. She swore she heard something outside. She grabbed her lantern and wrapped herself in a blanket. Opened the door. The yard was empty, except for Colt. He stood at the edge of the field, shirt soaked, eyes locked on something she couldn't see. His back was rigid, hands clenched. She moved toward him, calling his name. He didn't move. Then she saw the tracks. In the mud, hoof prints, fresh, too many for one rider. "Colt," she said, closer now. "What is it?" He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw something new in his eyes. Fear. He pointed toward the hills. "Someone coming?" she asked. He nodded. "You know who?" He wrote in the mud. They followed. Her heart dropped. "Why? Who are they?" Another word scratched in the earth. "Colon butchers." Rain poured harder, washing away the letters almost as fast as he wrote them. Colt reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilskin. He unrolled it quickly. A long-barreled revolver. Old but well kept, etched with marks along the handle. Each one different. Notches. She took a step back. "How many?" He held up 3 fingers. Then 2 more. 5. Eliza looked toward the barn, the dark outline of the house, the lone tree near the fence line where she'd once buried a dog. She was going to have to defend it all. She was going to have to fight, but she wasn't alone. Colt holstered the gun and turned to her. He took her hand gently, carefully, and placed something in it. Another carving, a mother wolf with a pup. Before she could say a word, he turned and vanished into the dark. She stood in the storm, water soaking her to the skin, staring at the little wooden figure in her palm. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. The story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The rain was still falling by morning, though softer now, a gentle curtain that turned the red Wyoming dust to mud and the hills into mist-wreathed giants. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She sat at the table, lamp burning low, a cup of cold tea untouched by her hand. She had cleaned her old rifle, laid out a handful of cartridges, and made a list of supplies in her head. Every useful thing in the house. The tin of powdered milk, 2 candles, 1 box of matches, a can of beans she'd been saving, a bottle of laudanum in the medicine drawer, still half full. Every so often, her eyes drifted to the carving Colt had given her, the mother wolf and her pup. She hadn't put it down all night. Just before dawn, she moved to the window. In the half-light, she saw him return. Colt came up the rise with his shoulders hunched against the wind, the revolver slung low on his hip. His eyes swept the yard before he stepped onto the porch. "They close?" she asked without preamble. He nodded. "How long?" He held up one hand, 4 fingers. "Hours?" A slow nod. She rubbed at the back of her neck. Her heart was pounding again, but she wasn't sure whether it was fear or adrenaline. "Then we better start getting ready." They moved quickly. Colt reinforced the barn doors with planks from the shed. Eliza boiled water and packed jars into crates. The storm had filled the rain barrels, and Colt siphoned what he could into buckets, preparing for a siege. In the late morning, the wind changed. The air went still. The animals grew restless, and then they came, 5 riders cresting the hill, dark figures against the pale sky, their horses frothing and wild-eyed. One carried a long rifle slung across his back. Another wore a buffalo duster that trailed behind him like smoke. All of them rode with the arrogance of men who'd never been stopped, never been questioned. Eliza stood on the porch with the rifle in her hands. Colt was beside her, his revolver resting against his thigh. The leader, a man with a grizzled beard and a black bandana over his mouth, raised a hand. They stopped 20 paces from the porch. "That your mute dog, lady?" he called out. Eliza didn't answer. Colt didn't blink. "We're just here for him," the man continued. "Ain't got no quarrel with you. Let us take what's ours, and we'll be on our way." Colt stepped forward, slowly, calmly. He raised both hands in the air, then pointed to himself. Then drew a slow line across his throat. No. The leader laughed. "You want to die here, is that it? Fine by me." His hand dropped. The men fanned out, forming a half circle around the house. Colt moved like lightning, shoving Eliza behind a pillar as the first shot rang out. The bullet splintered the porch rail where her head had been. She hit the ground hard, rifle clutched in her arms. "Barn!" she shouted, already scrambling to her feet. "We fall back to the barn." Colt nodded, fired 2 shots to cover her, then darted after her as they made a break across the muddy yard. More gunfire followed, windows shattered. A chicken coop exploded into feathers. Inside the barn, Colt slammed the doors shut and braced them with a thick beam. Eliza checked the rifle. 1 bullet left in the chamber. 4 more in her pocket. Colt knelt beside a small window and began returning fire. Each shot was precise, measured. "Why are they after you?" she demanded. "What did you do?" He didn't look away. Just reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled piece of newspaper, and tossed it to her. She unfolded it. The ink was smeared with age, but the headline was clear enough. 5 men wanted for the bloodshed at Gray Butte. Reward $500 each. Below the headline were sketches. 5 faces. One was Colt. "You rode with them?" He nodded. "But you ran." He nodded again. She stared at the paper, at the faces. "You helped them do that?" This time he hesitated. Then rode in the dirt beside him, tried to stop them. Was too late. She stared at the writing, heart hammering. Outside, more bullets slammed into the barn. Colt turned back to the window and took another shot. A scream followed. 1 down. Eliza crouched beside him. "We hold them here?" He shook his head. He pointed to the loft. Above them, the barn's hayloft extended to a back hatch, a rarely used opening that led into the woods behind the property. Colt pantomimed climbing, then motioned for her to go. "Not without you." He shook his head and pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. Inside were extra bullets. She clutched them. "You're staying," he nodded. "You think you'll stop all of them?" He held up 2 fingers. Then 1, 3 left. She turned toward the ladder but hesitated. "If I go... you better not die." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his eyes softened. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out another carving. A lion, strong, regal. He placed it in her hand. Then pushed her toward the ladder. She climbed out outside. More shots rang out. The barn shook with impact. Eliza ducked through the hatch and into the trees, moving as quickly as she could through the underbrush. Branches slapped at her arms. Mud sucked at her boots. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Behind her, she heard one final explosion of gunfire, then silenced out. Eliza didn't stop. She made it to the creek and crouched low, watching the trees, heart in her throat, Long minutes passed. Then a figure emerged from the tree. Line. Colt. Bleeding from the shoulder. Limping, but alive. He held up 3 fingers, then made a 0, all 5 dead. He collapsed beside her, breathing hard. Eliza pressed her hand to his wound. "You're a damn fool," she muttered, "but you did it." He looked at her and tried to smile. She held up the lion carving. "Don't think this means I forgive you for scaring the hell out of me." He just closed his eyes. And for the first time, Eliza Cordell felt something stir inside her. Not just the baby. Hope. Real, bone-deep hope. She wrapped an arm around him as the rain began again, soft and steady like applause, and together they watched the sun break through the clouds, spilling light across the broken world they'd fought to save. Dawn came pale and slow. The rain had passed, but the clouds remained, hanging low and heavy like a bruise over the hills. The storm had carved ruts into the earth, pooling water in every divot. Birds began to sing, but it was a cautious chorus, thin and uncertain. Eliza stepped out onto her porch, the mother wolf carving still in her pocket, her rifle slung over her shoulder. The scent of wet earth and burned wood filled her nose. Her garden had survived mostly. Clover stood tethered near the paddock, chewing lazily, one leg still wrapped in clean linen. Colt was nowhere in sight. She called out once, "Colt?" No answer. For a heartbeat, she feared he had vanished. Run off into the dark after warning her. Left her alone again. But when she turned toward the barn, she saw smoke, a cooking fire. He stood near it, frying something in a pan over an open flame. His jacket was draped over a fence post. His shirt clung to his back, still damp, streaked with dried mud. As she approached, he gestured toward a stump beside him, an invitation. Eliza sat. "You make breakfast too?" He handed her a plate without answering. 2 eggs, cornbread, a slice of jerky cut into ribbons. She took it slowly, surprised by the smell. She hadn't had a full meal in days. He didn't eat until she took her first bite. They sat in silence as the world warmed around them. When the food was gone, he handed her a strip of paper. On it, in block letters, "They won't be the last." Eliza nodded. "I figured they'll keep coming. Because of you." He didn't answer. "I don't scare easy." He scratched another word onto the wood of the stump. "Baby." Her hand dropped to her belly instinctively. The child kicked, strong and fierce. She met his eyes. "You think I can't protect it?" He shook his head, then placed his palm against his chest. "Me. I protect." She watched him. Really watched him. The way his jaw clenched with determination. The tremble in his fingers when he set the paper down. There was something beneath all that silence and strength. Not fear. Not guilt. Resolve. He stood suddenly, walked to the barn, and returned with something wrapped in burlap. He laid it across her lap. It was a rifle, long-barreled, custom stock. The initials M.H. carved into the wood. "Whose?" He pointed to himself. "You made this?" He nodded. She ran her hand along the weapon, feeling the smooth finish. It was beautifully crafted, balanced. "Deadly. Why give it to me?" He handed her another note. "Because I won't always be here." Her chest tightened. "You're leaving." Colt looked away. "You think I can't fight without you?" He shook his head. "Then why?" He didn't write anything. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small, worn envelope. Inside was a torn photo, a younger Colt, maybe 20, standing beside a woman and 2 children. The edges were charred. Eliza studied it. "Your family?" He nodded. "Where are they?" He didn't answer. She knew. Gone. She closed the envelope gently and handed it back. "You want to keep me safe because you couldn't keep them." His jaw tightened. She stood, stepped close, placed the rifle back in his arms. "Then stay." He blinked. "Stay," she repeated. "Don't run from the ghosts. Help me fight what's still coming." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. Later that day, she found him in the shed, hammering boards into shape, reinforcing the windows, fortifying the porch. He didn't rest until sunset. Eliza made stew. They ate on the stoop. When the stars came out, she leaned back and asked, "You ever kill a man before Grey Butte?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded. "Many?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "And after?" Another nod. She watched the fire flicker in his eyes. "Was it always bad men?" He looked down, then reached for her plate. Wrote in the leftover sauce with his finger. Tried. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night, she found a new carving on her windowsill. A horse rearing up. Underneath it, a smaller one. A full. She touched her stomach and whispered, "He believes in us." Out in the barn, Colt lay awake, staring at the stars through a crack in the roof. He had stayed. He would keep staying. Until the fight came again, and when it did, he would meet it. Not as a shadow, but as a man worth remembering. Night settled like smoke over the plains, thick and unmoving. The house lay dark, its windows shuttered, the only light coming from the faint glow of coals in the hearth. Inside, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay on her side with a hand on her belly, staring at the wood grain in the wall, listening for anything out of place. The storm had moved on. But a different kind of tension remained. At some point in the middle of the night, she heard movement on the porch. Not heavy, not hurried, just a soft creak of boots on old wood. Her breath caught. She reached for the rifle beside her bed. Then, a gentle knock at the door. She rose, every part of her aching from the weight of what was to come. She creaked the door open, slowly. Colt stood there, soaked again. But this time, he wasn't staring into the distance. He was looking at her. In his hand was a bundle of papers. A ledger, torn at the edges, smudged with what looked like blood. He held it out to her. She took it, stepped aside to let him in, then closed the door. They sat at the table together, the lamp flickering between them. Eliza opened the ledger. The handwriting inside was crude, written in ink and charcoal, and in some places, dried brown streaks that might have once been words. It was a journal. Not Colt's, but someone else's. He tapped a line halfway down the first page. "Lynch the mute first. He'll scream the prettiest." Eliza read it twice. Then again. "They wrote it down?" Colt nodded. "Double quotes the men who did that to you?" He nodded again. She flipped through more pages. Crude sketches, names, symbols she didn't recognize. Who were they? Colt reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded cloth. He opened it carefully. Inside was a pin. A silver circle with 3 X's engraved into the center. "This a Gand?" He pointed to the pin, then pointed to the journal. Then made a slicing motion across his throat. "You killed them." He nodded, but some escaped. He opened his hand. 5 fingers. She understood. 5 remained, and those 5 had followed. Eliza closed the journal. "Why now? Why come after you after all this time?" Colt took the pencil she kept near the stove and scribbled on the back of an old calendar page. "Because I have something they want." She frowned. "Like what?" He hesitated, then wrote one word colon-proof. It took her a second. Then it hit. "This ledger, it names them. It proves what they did." He nodded. "And you kept it?" Another nod. "They want it back." Colt tore off a corner of the page and wrote something else. "Not just that. They want me dead so no one can read it." Eliza pressed her fingers against her temples. "Jesus, this is bigger than just you. This could take down the whole group." He met her gaze and nodded. She looked at the journal again. "Why me? Why give it to me?" He tapped her belly gently. Then her heart. Then the journal. "You believe in right things." The words nearly undid her. She wiped at her eyes and stood. "All right, then we fight." He stood too. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Colt rigged the barn with traps wire and nails, pieces of glass on string, hinges that shrieked when moved. Eliza set up positions around the property, high ground with rifle cover. They dug shallow trenches by the gate, reinforced the porch with scrap metal from the shed. Each night, they slept only in shifts. And each night, she grew more sure of one thing. She wasn't alone. The contraction started on the third day. She was stirring. Beans over the fire when the first hit. Like a steel band around her stomach, squeezing tight. She gasped, dropped the spoon, and clutched the table. Colt was beside her in an instant. She waved him off. "I'm fine. Just the wind, maybe." He didn't buy it. He pointed to her belly. Then raised his eyebrows. "Early," she grunted. "Still got time." But an hour later, the second came. Harder than the third. She fell to her knees with the fourth. Colt carried her to the bed without a word. He brought towels, heated water, placed a bucket beside the bed. All without asking. She tried to laugh. "Through the pain. You been through this before?" He shook his head. "Could have fooled me." He wrote something and handed it to her. "Had a sister. Delivered her baby alone in the woods. I remember." She gripped his hand as another contraction rolled through her. Hours passed. The pain came in waves, like thunder from beneath. She screamed once, bit her lip till it bled, cursed the child, then prayed for it, then cursed it again. Colt never left her side. Then the noise changed. Not from her, from outside. Hoof, beats. Distant, faint, but growing. Colt stood. She grabbed his hand. "Don't you leave me now." He looked torn. Another contraction hit. She screamed again. Colt ran to the window, then to the bed. He scribbled a note. "1 hour, I hold them off. You hold on." She clutched the note. "You better come back." He kissed her forehead, then vanished out the door. Outside, the world turned to thunder, and inside, Eliza Cordell prepared to bring life into a world set on taking hers. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The morning after the storm, the land lay bruised and dripping. Pools of water glimmered in the troughs of the dirt road, and the hills glistened under a blanket of dew. A stillness had settled, one that didn't feel like peace but rather the holding of breath, as if the earth itself was waiting. Eliza stepped outside, boots squelching into the muddy porch boards. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and ash from the fire Colt had tended before dawn. She looked toward the barn and saw him already working, shirt damp with sweat, hammering a board into place over one of the windows. He turned when he heard her, gave her a brief nod, then gestured to the field. The hoofprints had deepened in. The night soaked into the ground like scars. They hadn't disappeared with the rain. "They're close," she said, mostly to herself. Colt picked up a small sack near his feet and brought it over. Inside were cartridges neatly stacked. He handed her a piece of paper. "Tonight." She nodded. "We ready?" He hesitated, then held up one hand, wavered it side to side. "Yeah, me too." She went inside, checked the windows again, secured the front door. Her hand kept drifting to the carving he'd given her, the mother wolf and pup. It sat now on the mantel, a quiet promise. Throughout the day, they worked in tandem, fortifying, planning, watching. Colt placed sharpened stakes beneath the window sills. Eliza set up oil lamps in the field, ready to be lit as distractions. She filled a basin with water, packed her rifle with more rounds than she thought she'd ever use, and set a knife on the bedside table. By late afternoon, the wind began to shift. Again. Colt crouched at the edge of the field, his eyes fixed on the tree line. He tapped the ground twice, then gestured to the far left ridge. "How many?" He held up 3 fingers, then hesitated. Held up 2 more. 5. She swallowed. "Same ones?" He nodded slowly. "You sure?" He didn't need to be. She could feel it, that evening, as the sky turned purple and the last light filtered through the trees. She cooked a pot of stew and poured 2 bowls. Colt sat across from her, shoulders tense, revolver resting near his foot. She looked at him. Really looked. "You think we're gonna die tonight?" He stared at her, unblinking, then slowly shook his head. "We fight, we win." It wasn't on paper. He'd mouthed it. She blinked. "You just spoke." He nodded. Double quotes how? He raised a hand and pressed 2 fingers to his throat, then shook his head. Not voice. Words. The meaning landed in her chest like a stone. "It hurts." He nodded again. "You still do it." He looked at her. There was something new in his gaze, not just resolve, not just duty. Faith. She stood, crossed the room, and kissed his forehead. Then went to prepare. When night fell, it came all at once. No moon, no stars. Just a thick blackness that wrapped around the house and barn like a shroud. The first sound was the crunch of gravel. Then the creak of saddles. Colt signaled from the porch. Eliza lit the first lamp and rolled it into the field. It cast a wide pool of light, then another. A second flame, another decoy. Shadows moved at the edge of the trees. "They're testing us," she whispered. Colt raised his gun. The first shot rang out, a flare of fire from the hill. A bullet whined past Eliza's ear and embedded in the doorframe. She dropped low, returned fire. One of the men in the field stumbled back into the darkness. Colt didn't move from his post. He fired with the calm of a man counting seconds. Not bullets. Another shadow collapsed. From behind the barn. 2 more figures broke through the tree. Lines shouting. One carried a torch. The other had a shotgun. Colt turned and fired twice. The torchbearer fell. The second took cover behind the rain barrel. Eliza threw a lamp toward the barn, its fire spreading across the wet grass. The light exposed another man crawling toward the side window. She fired, missed, fired again. He went down. Now only 2 remained. One at the rear of the barn. One behind the hay cart. Colt advanced. He didn't wait. Eliza followed. From behind the cart, the last man shouted, "You can't stop what's coming. He wants the mute dead." Colt didn't flinch. He stepped forward into the FIRELIG. The man raised his weapon. Eliza screamed, "No!" But Colt was faster. One shot. The man collapsed. Only one remained. From the rear, a voice called out, cold, clear, "I don't care who you were, Shadow. You're mine now." Eliza froze. Colt turned slowly. The last man stepped forward. Tall, dressed in black. The mark of the 3 X's burned into his left hand. "You should have died hanging." Colt raised his gun. "Go on, try it. Let's see if the legend's true." They stood 10 paces apart. Neither moved. Eliza stood between them, unsure of who to shoot first. Then Colt whispered, "Move." She dove. Gunfire erupted. When she turned, Colt was still standing. The other man was not. Colt dropped to one knee, breath shallow. She ran to him. "You're hit." He nodded. Double quotes bad? He shook his head, then handed her a new carving, a phoenix rising from flame. They sat there, surrounded by smoke and silence, and watched the dawn push through the trees. They had won, and tomorrow would come. But today? Today they were still alive, still fighting, still free. Eliza didn't sleep that night. The storm rattled the windows until nearly dawn. And even after the thunder quieted, her heart refused to settle. She sat by the hearth with the carving in her hand, the mother wolf and her pup her fingers tracing the ridges of its grain. The baby inside her stirred occasionally, as if reacting to her unease. Colt didn't return. She'd expected that. Somehow, in the deepest part of herself, she knew he wouldn't come back until he had done what he needed to do. Until whatever past had clawed its way out of the earth was once again buried. Or dead. When morning broke, Eliza stepped onto the porch and took a deep breath of cold, rain-drenched air. The world was still, too still. No birds, no cattle, not even the wind, just silence. She spent the day preparing. She boiled water, cleaned her rifle again, sharpened the knife she'd once used to skin deer. Every movement felt slow and deliberate, like she was moving through molasses. She paused often to rest her back against a beam, one hand always on her belly. The sun passed overhead in a blur. Late afternoon brought no word. No sign of Colt. She started pacing. It was near twilight when she heard the distant sound of hooves. Not a lot. Just one. She stood at the edge of the porch, rifle in hand. A figure came over the ridge, hunched forward. On a horse whose gait faltered every few steps. Colt. She ran to meet him. He slid off Clover and stumbled, catching himself on her shoulder. Blood stained his shirt. His right arm hung useless. "Jesus," she breathed. "What did you do?" He pressed a carved figure into her palm. A hawk, wings outstretched. Then he collapsed. He drifted in and out for the next 2 days, feverish, muttering. In his broken rasp, Eliza kept the fire going and changed his bandages with shaking hands. She boiled herbs, mixed salves, and kept his lips wet with broth and honey water. He didn't say who he'd killed. She didn't ask. On the 3rd day, he woke. Fully. He tried to sit up, groaned, and sank back. She sat beside him, exhausted but grateful. "You came back," he nodded. "You're a fool." He wrote on a nearby scrap of sackcloth, "Couldn't leave you." She took his hand, held it. Outside, birds began to sing again. He healed slowly. A week passed, then 2. He began helping her around the house again. Just small things, carrying water, feeding the animals, sitting with her as she planted the rest of the garden. They didn't speak of what had happened. Not yet, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy. It was safe. Then one morning, Eliza woke to find him gone again. Her heart jumped into her throat. She checked the barn, the paddock, the hills. Nothing. But on the stoop sat a wooden box. She opened it slowly. Inside were carvings. 10 of them, each marked with a name, each resembling a man's face. Below them, one last note: "They won't follow ever again." Her hands trembled as she touched each piece. He had carved their faces, marked their ends, a record, a tribute, a warning. She pressed the lid closed and brought the box inside. He returned before sundown, limping, tired. She opened the door and embraced him without a word. Later, as they sat on the porch, she finally asked, "What now?" Colt stared at the sunset. Then he smiled, just a little. And for the first time, Eliza believed it was going to be okay. Not perfect, not simple, but okay. Because they'd earned it, together. The sun broke through a veil of mist the next morning, casting long gold fingers over the mud-soaked landscape. Eliza stood at the edge of her porch, the wolf carving still clutched in her hand, her hair wet and tangled, her dress clinging to her legs. The storm had passed, but something deeper had settled into her bones, the knowledge that her world was no longer quiet, no longer forgotten. Inside the house, she packed supplies. Dried meat, a flask of clean water, ammunition she kept locked away in a small chest beneath her bed. She wrapped the wooden figure in a strip of linen and tucked it into her coat pocket, close to her heart. Then she sat by the window and waited. Colt hadn't come back, not at sunrise, not an hour after, not by noon. She wanted to tell herself he had a reason, that he was preparing, that he was scouting. But the truth twisted inside her. What if they had already come? What if he had gone out to face them alone? She stepped out into the pale morning light and followed the hoofprints that cut through the field like scars. Her boots sank into the wet earth as she walked along the trail. The wind whispered through the grasses, and the crows watched her from the fence posts. The tracks led her to the ridgeline, then curved into a thicket of scrub and low brush. She moved slower now, her hand never straying far from the rifle slung across her back. Her breath came shorter, not from the walk, but from the weight of her belly and the weight of dread. And then she saw him. Colt stood beneath a crooked pine tree, staring out over the valley. His back was to her, his hat pulled low, revolver resting against his hip. But he wasn't alone. 5 men were arrayed behind him. They hadn't seen her. They circled him like vultures, but with guns instead of wings. One was short and barrel-chested, with a scar curling from his ear to his chin. Another had long hair tied back in a greasy braid. The third wore a Union coat with the sleeves torn off. The last 2 hung back, quiet, almost casual, but their eyes gleamed like knives. Colt didn't speak. He simply stood there, waiting. Eliza crouched low in the grass, heart pounding. The man in the Union coat stepped forward. "We gave you a chance. Muty could have run south, could have stayed gone." Colt didn't move. The man spit into the dirt. "But no, you come back. You drag your ghosts with you." Another man laughed. "Should have finished the job when we had the rope around his throat." Eliza raised the rifle. Her hands were shaking. Then the short man lunged. Colt moved first, faster than she thought possible. The revolver barked once. Then again, the short man dropped. The long-haired one shouted and drew his blade. The others scattered. Chaos. Eliza rose, fired. One of the men spun to the ground, clutching his leg. Colt dropped another. Then silence. 2 of them ran, vanished into the brush. Colt turned, breathing hard. Eliza stepped into the clearing. He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. She reached into her coat, pulled out the carving. Held it up. He nodded. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Together, they returned to the ranch. The sun hung low now, brushing the grass with fire. The world had changed again. She helped him clean his wounds. They buried the bodies deep in the backfield, said no prayers, spoke no names. That night, she made tea. They sat on the porch in silence, until she finally said, "It's not over, is it?" Colt didn't shake his head, didn't nod, just watched. The dark horizon. She leaned back and rested a hand on her belly. "Well," she whispered, "neither are we." The child kicked. And Colt reached out, gently placing his hand over hers, still silent, still strong, still standing, together. They buried the last 2 men at the edge of the pasture, where the land turned rocky and stubborn. The graves were shallow, unmarked. No prayers were said, no words were spoken. Just Colt, shovel in hand, and Eliza standing beside him, arms wrapped around her belly as the wind rolled in low from the west. Colt finished the job, wiped his brow, and tossed the shovel aside. He turned to Eliza, eyes asking what neither of them could say aloud. She nodded once. "Come on inside, you need rest." They walked back together, silent, the sun setting like a bloodied curtain across the sky. Inside, she poured water into a tin cup, handed it to him, and sat near the hearth. Colt took a seat opposite her, back stiff, his eyes haunted but calm. "I saw how you moved," she said, voice low. "You didn't hesitate, not once." Colt stared into the fire. "How long have you been doing this?" He picked up a charred piece of wood and wrote on the stone, "Since I was 17. That young?" He nodded. "You were a soldier." He scratched again. "No uniform. Just war." She exhaled through her nose. "That ledger you gave me? I read more of it. The things they did to others before before you stopped them." He watched her carefully. "You know, you might be the only good man I ever met with blood on his hands." He lowered his head. She leaned forward. "Colt, look at me." He did. "You saved lives. Mine, my babies. Maybe more we don't even know about. That ledger proves what those men were. And you ended them. I don't care what you had to do to get it done." His jaw tightened. He scratched again. "They killed my sister." She nodded slowly. "That why you stopped talking?" "No. That was before." He reached into his coat and pulled out a scrap of fabric. It looked like the corner of an old dress, faded blue with embroidered daisies. He laid it on the table between them. "Her name?" He scratched one last word. "June." They sat there for a while, listening to the fire crack and pop. Eliza looked at the name, then back at Colt. She'd be proud of you. He didn't reply. The next week passed in uneasy quiet. The garden began to bloom again. Colt patched the roof. Eliza taught him how to knead dough one evening, her hands flour-covered, his fumbling attempts drawing the first smile she'd given in days. But something loomed over them. One morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Eliza spotted him from the porch, not one of the butchers, not dressed like them. This man wore a clean gray duster, polished boots, and rode a chestnut mare that looked too fine for this part of the country. Colt came up behind her, eyes narrowing. The rider pulled up 50 yards away and raised a hand. Don't mean no harm. Just got questions. Eliza stepped down. Colt stayed behind her. Who are you? Name's Avery Brooks. Marshal. She looked him over. No badge, no deputy. Where's your tin star, Marshal? He smiled. You don't wear it out here unless you want to get shot. Heard some things. Figured I'd ask about them. What kind of things? Bodies, 5 men. Scattered across different counties. All with the same wound patterns, same calling card. He looked at Colt. Colt didn't blink. The marshal continued. I know who you are. I've read the files. The rope didn't finish the job, huh? Eliza stepped forward. You got proof he did anything illegal? That ledger you sent the governor might count, but I ain't here to arrest him. Colt TENCD. Brooks raised a hand. I'm here to offer a deal. Eliza frowned. What kind? People like the butchers don't just vanish. There's always another branch to the root. You want to protect your family? Help me clean it out. Colt looked to Eliza. She shook her head. We just finished a war. You want us to ride into another? The marshal lowered his hand. I'll be back in 3 days. You decide by then. After that, this place is on its own. He turned and rode off. Colt stood motionless. Eliza stared at the fading dust trail. You don't owe him a damn thing, she muttered. We got a life here. We earned it. But she wasn't sure if she was talking to Colt or herself. That night, she found him sitting in the barn, sharpening a blade that had seen too many years. She sat beside him. You thinking of going? He didn't answer. She whispered, Don't leave us. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a new carving. A tree. Rooted. He pressed it into her hand. She smiled. Maybe, just maybe, he was staying. At least for now. The third night after the marshal's visit, the wind howled like wolves. Eliza lay in bed, the baby curled tight in her belly, her mind spinning. She couldn't sleep. Not with the ledger tucked beneath her pillow and the carving of the tree on the windowsill. Not with Colt sharpening his blade in the barn under a lone lantern flame. When she finally gave in and went outside, she found him kneeling over an old cedar stump, whittling again. His hands moved slow and precise, even as the wind lifted the corners of his coat and tossed dust into the corners of his eyes. He didn't look up when she approached, but she knew he heard her. I keep thinking, she said quietly, if we'd met a different way, maybe I'd still be a schoolteacher in Cheyenne. Maybe you'd still have your voice. Colt didn't respond, just kept carving. But maybe then I wouldn't be strong enough to keep this baby safe, and you wouldn't know how to fight. Maybe broken's what we had to be. He finally looked at her, not with pity, not with pain. Just understanding. She sat down beside him. He handed her the figure. This one was a baby bird hatching from its shell. Tiny cracks running from beak to wingtip. Life from fracture. She smiled. The next day, Eliza rode into town for supplies. She left Colt behind, though it twisted her gut to do so. He was the sort of man who made silence feel like security. At the general store, folks greeted her politely but with guarded eyes. Word had spread. Some still didn't believe she'd bought the mute cowboy out of kindness. Some figured it was fear. Others figured worse. She ignored them. Picked up sugar, beans, 2 pounds of salt pork, and lamp oil. Then, just as she was about to leave, the postmaster called out, "You Eliza Cordell?" She turned. "That's right. Got something came for you." Sealed letter. From Cheyenne. Her stomach flipped. She hadn't heard from anyone back east since her brother's funeral. The envelope was stiff, thick paper with a crimson wax seal. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten in a tight, elegant scrawl. Asterisk asterisk to Eliza Cordell word. Reached us of your recent survival. We regret to inform you that the man known as Richard Avery Brooks is not, and has never been, affiliated with any federal or territorial law enforcement. He is wanted in 3 counties under various aliases. Last known to impersonate a marshal in Laramie. If he has contacted you, exercise extreme caution. Asterisk asterisk no signature. Just the seal of the U.S. War Department. Eliza stared at the paper until her fingers went cold. She rode hard all the way back. Colt was saddling Clover when she arrived. His eyes met hers. He already knew. "He's coming back tomorrow," she said. "But he's not a marshal. He's worse." Colt wrote quickly on a scrap of burlap. Asterisk asterisk, he's the root. Butcher leader. Used badge to clean up. Eliza's voice trembled. "He tricked us, tried to get you to leave, or worse, follow him." Colt nodded, then pulled out a small pouch from under his saddle. It was full of bullets, marked ones. Symbols, etched into their bases. She raised an eyebrow. "What are these?" He scrawled, "Silver, hollow, for monsters." She blinked. "You think he's something else?" He didn't answer. But he loaded his gun. The following dawn broke blood red. Eliza sat on the porch, cradling a rifle in her lap. Colt stood near the gate, hat pulled low, eyes scanning the horizon. Just after sunrise, the dust trail appeared. Brooks rode in slowly, alone, no backup. Just that same smug expression on his face. He stopped 20 yards away and dismounted. "You think you found the truth," he called out. "But you only found one piece." Colt didn't move. Brooks stepped forward, hands outstretched. "You really gonna shoot a man who came to help?" Eliza raised her rifle. "You're no marshal." Brooks grinned. "No, I ain't. I'm something better." Colt stepped between them. Brooks smiled wider. "There he is. The quiet man. You know, your voice ain't what made you dangerous. It was what you lost, what you remembered." Colt drew his revolver. Brooks didn't flinch. "Go ahead, Shadow. Finish what you started all those years ago." Eliza whispered, "Don't. He wants you to." Colt held his aim. Brooks tilted his head. "I know your secrets, Colt. You weren't just a victim. You were one of us. Before you turned." Colt's hand trembled. Eliza stepped forward. "That true?" Colt didn't move. Brooks said, "He was our best tracker. Our cleanest killer. Until he found that girl. The one who screamed his name." Eliza turned to Colt, eyes wide. Brooks smiled. "June." Colt fired. Brooks spun, hit the dirt. Silence. Then Brooks sat up. Laughed. "You forgot what I am, Shadow. You think bullets end a storm?" Colt fired again. And again. And again. Each round tore into Brooks's chest, but he rose, limbs cracking, mouth curling into something inhuman. Eliza screamed. "Colt!" Colt reached into his pouch. The silver bullet. He loaded it. Aimed. Fired. This time, Brooks went down hard. Didn't get up. Eliza ran to Colt, heart thundering. "What was he?" Colt took a long breath, wrote one word. "Hollow." She looked at Brooks's still body. His eyes open but empty. Then turned to Colt. "So are we done now?" He shook his head. "Just started." She touched her stomach. "Then we finish it. Together." He took her hand, and together they turned toward the rising sun, toward the future, whatever came next. The town buzzed for a week after Brooks died, not because folks knew who he truly was, But because they didn't, a stranger, sharp-dressed and silver-tongued, had ridden into their valley and vanished overnight. Some whispered he'd run off with stolen money. Others said he'd been a Pinkerton agent gone rogue. A few thought he'd been the devil himself, chasing the mute man and the pregnant woman who lived too far outside town to be normal. Eliza and Colt said nothing. They didn't. Bury Brooks. They burned him. Colt insisted. Poured kerosene over the corpse, stood guard while the flames consumed him. When the smoke finally cleared, all that was left were melted bullets and a ring of blackened earth. Eliza didn't ask what would have happened if they hadn't used silver. She already knew. They rebuilt slowly. The porch roof had taken damage in the fight. The barn door still hung loose on one hinge. But the land felt safer, less heavy. As if a weight had been lifted, the baby grew restless in her belly. She'd started sleeping less, dreaming more, vivid dreams. Nightmares of windstorms and firelight. Of Colt walking into a black forest and never coming back. She'd wake clutching the carving of the tree, sweat running down her spine. Colt, for his part, grew quieter, which was saying something. He still carved, but the figures had changed. No longer animals, no longer peaceful things. Now they were monsters, horned and winged, some with teeth so long they split the grain. Others looked almost human. One night she found him sitting at the table, carving something small and square. She leaned over. "What is it?" He turned it in his hand. It was a coffin. Inside it, a tiny doll with button eyes. She stepped back. "That's a child." He nodded. "Whose?" He picked up charcoal and scribbled on the wall. "One of theirs. Not human. They her." Stomach twisted. "You think they're still coming?" He nodded again. "Why? Brooks is dead." He wrote slowly. "He wasn't the root." "Just the face," she whispered. "Then what is the root?" He stared at her for a long time, then wrote one word: blood. A few days later, a letter arrived. No postage. No signature. Just a note nailed to the barn door. "You took something that was never yours. Now we take something from you. Midnight. B. Ready. Eliza clutched the paper. Her hands cold. Colt read it and didn't flinch. He simply walked to the back shed and started pulling out weapons she didn't even know they had. An old shotgun, a blade made of bone, a bow strung with sinew so tight it sang. Eliza packed supplies, bandages, boiled cloths, a flask of moonshine. She boiled water. Set a cot in the corner in case the baby decided it was time. They set traps around the property. Hidden stakes, tripwires, spikes buried beneath loose soil. At sunset, they sat on the porch, guns on their laps. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. The baby kicked hard. Colt reached over, placed his hand on her stomach. She closed her eyes and waited. Midnight came. Nothing happened. Then the wind stopped. Completely. No rustle. No night birds. No movement at all. Eliza sat up straight. From the tree line, shadows moved. Colt stood. Figures emerged, silent, dozens, all dressed in old-world clothes. Lace collars, oilskin jackets, boots with silver buckles. Their eyes reflected nothing, not even moonlight. The one at the front wore a crown of antlers. His face was painted black, mouth sewn shut with red thread. Eliza raised her rifle. The leader lifted one hand. Colt stepped forward. Eliza grabbed his sleeve. "Don't." He placed a carving in her hand. A bear, its mouth open, standing guard. Then he walked into the yard. The leader stepped forward too. They stood 10 paces apart. Colt pulled out the bone. "Blade." The leader raised his arms. The others began to chant, not with mouths, with breath. With sound that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Eliza covered her ears. The baby twisted inside her. Pain bloomed in her gut. Colt didn't move. Then he struck. One clean slash across the antlered man's throat. Silence. The leader dropped. The chant broke. Chaos. Eliza fired. Colt spun. Blade flashing. Figures rushed them. Some crawled. Some floated. She screamed his name, and for the first time he answered. Eliza. Then he vanished in the swarm. She kept firing, reloaded, fired again. Something clawed her shoulder. She turned and stabbed with the kitchen knife. One by one, they fell, burned, bled, melted into smoke. By dawn, they were gone, everyone, except Colt. She searched the yard, the field, the barn. Nothing. Then she found a carving on the porch. A fox. Curled up, waiting. She held it to her chest. And wept. He was still out there. She knew it. But now she had to survive, for her child, for him, for what came next. The day after Brooks fell, the wind changed. It no longer carried the scent of smoke and blood, but something clearer, a silence that felt earned. Not peaceful, but present. The kind of silence that comes when two people stop running, even if they know they may have to run again soon. Colt and Eliza buried Brooks beneath the twisted pine on the far hill, the same spot where Colt had once stood surrounded by men who'd wanted to drag him back into hell. The dirt was dry and hard. It took hours. They didn't speak much, but when Colt laid the final stone over the grave, Eliza placed a wooden carving at its head, a coiled serpent, cracked down the middle. When they returned to the ranch, the porch felt different. The land felt heavier, more real, as if now, finally, it belonged to them. That night, Eliza stirred a pot of stew and watched Colt as he sat carving beside the hearth. His hands moved steadily, but slower than before. Not from fatigue, but something else. Something gentler. She leaned forward. You ever think about what comes after all this? He looked up. After the fighting, the hiding, the monsters, the lies, what happens if we actually make it through this? He set down the carving, a bear cub curled up to sleep. Then he scratched something into a piece of scrap wood. Home. She smiled. You think we could make one? He nodded. Then he reached over and gently placed his hand on her stomach. The baby kicked in response. For the first time in weeks, Eliza laughed. But peace didn't last. 3 nights later, thunder rolled in again, and with it came a knock on the door. Eliza opened it. Rifle in hand, on the porch stood a girl. No more than 17, pale, thin. Her hair plastered to her face from the rain. Her clothes were torn, and a deep bruise bloomed across her cheek. Behind her stood a horse, soaked and trembling. Please, the girl whispered. They're coming. Colt appeared behind Eliza. The girl flinched at the sight of him. It's okay, Eliza said. Come in. The girl collapsed into her arms. They helped her to the fire, gave her dry clothes, food, water. She barely spoke for hours, just stared at the flames with wide, haunted eyes. Finally she whispered, They wear red scarves. 3 of them. Took my brother. Said I was next. I ran. Colt's hand tightened on his knife. One of them had a brand, she added. A burning cross right here. She pointed to the side of her neck. Eliza felt ice bloom in her chest. The red scarves. She heard of them. A brutal offshoot of the butchers, scattered and fragmented, but still vicious. They didn't care about money. They cared about fear. Colt stood. You can't go, Eliza said. We don't even know where they are. He pointed to the girl's horse. The saddle had blood on it. Then he carved a single word into the table. Trap. Eliza blinked. You think they let her go on purpose? He nodded. The girl looked up, ashamed. I didn't know. I swear, they just told me to run. It's not your fault, Eliza said. But Colt was already moving. He opened the floorboard beneath the table and retrieved the silver pouch. 2 bullets left. He strapped his knife to his hip. Colt, Eliza warned, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep making our home into a battlefield. He looked at her. Then carved, they bring the war, not us. And he was gone. Hours passed. Eliza Sat with the girl, who finally said her name was Nora. She was from a mining town north of Casper. Her family had been killed 2 winters ago. Her brother was all she had left. You think he can bring him back? She asked. Eliza didn't answer. She wanted to say yes. Colt returned near dawn. Covered in blood, one arm dislocated. A gash across his ribs, but he was alive, and Nora's brother was with him. Barely breathing, but alive. They treated the wounds, fed him broth. Nora sobbed beside him until she fell asleep. Colt sat on the porch, carving a small cross for the ones he couldn't save. Eliza joined him. "How many more?" she whispered. "How many pieces do we have to break into before the world leaves us alone?" He handed her the carving. Not a cross. A seed. Rooted. Ready. The next morning, Colt didn't rise. His fever had returned. Eliza sat by his side for 2 days, changing bandages, whispering to the baby that everything would be okay, that she believed in him, that she believed in all of them. On the 3rd night he opened his eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. She shook her head. "Don't force it. Just rest." He scribbled something weakly. Saw her, June. Said it's not time yet. Eliza cried for the first time in weeks. Because if June was still watching, then maybe the dead weren't gone. Maybe they were just waiting for the right fight, for the right time. For peace. Later that week, Eliza walked to the river with Nora and the boy, whose name was Elias. He was still healing, but strong enough to throw rocks and chase squirrels. They laughed. They ran. They were kids again. When she returned, Colt had carved something new, a cradle. He handed it to her, then kissed her hand. The war was not over, but the home they dreamed of, it had begun. The next weeks passed like a blur of dust, sweat, and slow healing. Colt worked from sunup to sundown, always just out of reach, always one shadow behind silence. He repaired the barn roof, dug a new trench line for water, reinforced the fence. With iron nails Eliza had bartered for months ago, but never had the strength to hammer in. Eliza grew heavier, slower, but her steps remained steady. She still hauled water, fed chickens, and read aloud to the baby every night by lantern light. Sometimes she read from memory, other times from a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, the only book that had survived the fire that ended her last home. Colt listened from the next room. She knew, because sometimes she'd stop reading mid-sentence just to see if he'd look up. He never did. But his hand would pause in its carving, and that was enough. She started finding new carvings each morning, one of a cradle, one of a star, one of a horse mid-gallop. She kept them on the shelf above the fireplace, like talismans. By the time September came, the air was crisp and dry. The leaves in the nearby hills turned from brown to gold, and the wind lost its edge of threat. For a little while, it felt like they were winning, until the fire. It began with smoke. A thick column rising from the southern ridge, curling against the morning sky like a warning. Eliza saw it first. She was collecting eggs when the chickens began to squawk wildly. When she stood up, the scent hit her: burnt wood, grease, horses. Colt appeared a moment later, shirt soaked with sweat from chopping logs, axe still in hand. His eyes followed hers to the smoke. Eliza dropped the basket. Colt dropped the axe. They ran, the neighbors to the south. The Murphys were good people. Old Jim Murphy had loaned them a mule once when their own was sick. His youngest son had left Eliza a bouquet of wildflowers after seeing her walk alone into town during her 5th month. When Colt and Eliza arrived, the barn was already engulfed. Bodies lay in the dirt. One still moved. Eliza rushed forward. Colt caught her shoulder and shook his head, but she tore away. It was the boy. 10, maybe 11. His shirt burned nearly off, face black with soot. His eyes flickered. She knelt, whispering his name. He blinked up at her, tried to speak. Colt dropped beside them, pulling a canteen from his saddle. The boy tried to drink, but choked. "Who did this?" Eliza whispered. He reached for her wrist, gripped it with impossible strength. Then he rasped. White teeth, red eyes. Colt froze. The boy convulsed, then went still. Eliza sobbed once. Just once. Colt stood, gaze locked on the smoking tree line. He carved a symbol into the dirt with his boot. It looked like a fang. They buried the boy alongside his family. Eliza didn't ask Colt what he thought it meant, because she already knew. This wasn't just another gang. This wasn't just vengeance. It was a hunt, and something was closing in. Colt started sleeping with his rifle beside him. He placed salt across the window sills. He carved a strange sigil into the doorframe. Something old, something jagged. Eliza didn't question it, but she prayed harder. Then, one night, it came. She woke to the sound of growling, not coyotes. Something deeper. Something with lungs bigger than a man's. Colt was already up, boots on, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. He handed her a knife, carved handle, silver blade. "Stay inside," he whispered. Her eyes widened. He had spoken. His voice, rough and gravel thick, was the first she had ever heard from him. She clutched the knife like it was holy. Colt stepped out onto the porch. Fog blanketed the fields. The moon shone high and bloated, and from the mist they emerged, 3 figures, not quite men, not quite beasts, eyes glowing red, teeth long, coats tattered, movements jerky, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Colt raised his rifle. They didn't flinch. "You took her," one hissed. "She was ours." Colt said nothing. "We come to take what was stolen." Eliza stepped into the doorway. "No one's taking anything," she said. One of the creatures grinned. "Then we burn it all." They lunged. Colt fired. The first shot took one in the eye. The second exploded a jaw. The third missed. Eliza hurled the knife. It struck the last creature in the chest. It screamed, fell, twitched. Then all was still. Colt stood over them, chest heaving. Eliza rushed forward. "What were they?" Colt turned, blood on his cheek. "Rifle in hand," he whispered. "Old sins." She looked at the bodies. Then at her belly. "Not for him," she said. "Not for our child." Colt knelt, pressed his head to her stomach. The wind howled, and somewhere, far off, the world turned again. But their home stood, their family endured, and the story wasn't finished yet. By the time the first snow fell, the ranch had changed. The days grew shorter, the wind cut sharper, and a fire in the hearth became the most precious thing in the house. Colt had finished the stone chimney just in time, and Eliza had never been more thankful for anything in her life. The baby was growing fast, strong. She could feel his little feet pressing against her ribs, reminding her constantly that soon, very soon, everything would shift again. Colt had built a cradle, sanded smooth, carved with patterns of stars and wildflowers. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but Eliza caught him once just standing over it, hand resting on the edge, his mouth moving silently like he was praying or remembering something he couldn't put into words. She didn't interrupt. He had earned his quiet. Nora and Elias had stayed. Eliza hadn't asked them to, but they hadn't left. Nora helped with the laundry and milking. Elias was still thin, still jumpy, but his laughter had returned. Sometimes he'd sit beside Colt and watch him carve, trying to mimic the smooth movements of blade against wood. There were fewer nightmares, fewer signs of danger, but still, they kept watch, because danger never writes ahead. To announce its visit, it came again in the form of a letter, delivered not by postman, but by arrow. One morning, Eliza opened the front door and found it lodged in the doorframe slick with wax, bearing a folded parchment tied with blood-colored twine. Colt read it first. He didn't speak, but his hands trembled. Eliza read it next. "We know what he took. We're coming. And when we do, not even that child will be spared." Signed with a symbol neither of them recognized, 2 jagged lines crossing like bones. Nora turned pale. Elias cried. Eliza burned the letter in the stove. Colt, for the first time since she'd met him, didn't work that day. He sat on the porch, rifle in lap, carving something sharp and angular. That night, he finally spoke again. "We leave." Eliza shook her head. "They'll follow. Wherever we go. This is our home. We made it one." He looked at her belly. "He needs safety. He needs parents who won't run." Colt's jaw tightened. She softened, reached out. "You once told me old sins were hunting you. Maybe that's true. Maybe they always will. But if we keep running, we teach him to run too. I want him to grow up knowing his parents stood their ground." Colt closed his eyes, then nodded. They made preparations, traps, rations, messages sent to nearby homesteads. They dug a root cellar deep enough to hide Nora and Elias, lined it with dried meats and candles. Eliza set aside 3 days' worth of clothes and laid them in a bag near the door. Just in case. The first attack came at dusk. 3 riders, red scarves, screaming like banshees as they charged down the slope. Colt fired the first. Shot. 1 dropped. Eliza shot the second. The third got close. Too close. Colt met him in the yard, hand to hand, knife to knife. It was brutal. Fast, blood and grit. When it was over, Colt stood panting, shirt torn, a fresh cut across his cheek. Eliza didn't ask if he was all right. She already knew. He was alive. They buried the bodies behind the barn. No markers. No prayers. The message was clear. Come again. And you won't leave at all. The next few days passed in silence. They waited. They watched. Colt carved something new each day. Eliza didn't ask what, but each one seemed harder, sharper, more like weapons than toys. On the 5th night, the labor began. It started with a tightness low in her spine. Then a pain like nothing she'd ever felt before. Not sharp, but deep, relentless. Colt found her doubled over near the hearth. He didn't panic. Just lifted her gently and laid her on the bed. Nora boiled water. Elias ran to fetch cloth. Colt stayed beside her. She squeezed his hand until her knuckles turned white. Hours passed. The storm outside returned. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder shook the windows. And through it all, Eliza pushed. Cried. Screamed. Until, just before dawn, a new cry filled the cabin. A baby. Colt took him in his arms, eyes wide, mouth open, shaking. "He's beautiful," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your name?" Nora asked. Breathless. Eliza looked at Colt. He carved 3 letters into a block of wood. Jed. Then smiled. And this time, when he looked at his son, he didn't look afraid. He looked home. Trouble would come again. It always did. But for that morning, wrapped in warmth and love and the promise of something better, they stood strong. They had each other. They had Jed. And they had a future worth carving together. By the time snow layered the fence posts like frosting on the bones of the land, Eliza knew she couldn't wait much longer. Jed had arrived safe and strong. But winter had arrived stronger. The kind of winter that silenced birdsong and froze door hinges in place. The kind that stretched into your bones and made every morning a battle just to rise from the bed. Colt did what he always did. He worked. He watched. He prepared. But there was something else in him now. Something softer. He held Jed like the child was a glass lantern, something bright and breakable. Every time Eliza placed the baby in his arms, Colt seemed to remember something, or maybe forget something terrible. He would hum deep in his chest, always the same tune. She didn't recognize it, but Jed calmed every time he heard it. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, she wondered if the hum was the only piece left of Colt's voice that still lived inside him. One afternoon, as the sun broke through for the first time in days, Eliza stepped outside to stretch her legs. She watched Colt chopping firewood in the clearing, his coat threadbare, but movement sure. Precise. Nora came up beside her, arms crossed. "You ever going to tell me what he did before you found him?" Eliza didn't look away. He survived. That's not a job, it is out here. Nora blew on her hands. Fair. Still ... man like that carries silence like it's armor. Maybe it is. Nora paused. You love him? Eliza turned. I trust him. That's more than most folks get. That evening Colt found a note nailed to the barn door. No name. No signature. Just 5 words scrawled in red ink. We still remember the gallows. Colt didn't show Eliza. Instead, he built a new trap door beneath the barn, reinforced the walls, carved new sigils into the beams. He began teaching Elias how to aim. He trained Nora to set snare lines. He slept less, carved more. And each morning, before sunrise, he rode out just far enough to scan the horizon for riders. They hadn't come yet, but they would. Late one night, Eliza woke to find Colt gone from bed. She followed the faint glow of lantern light to the back porch. He sat with Jed in his arms, rocking slowly in the chair she'd sanded herself 3 winters ago. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and slow. Colt didn't look up. He smiled today, Eliza whispered. Colt nodded. His breath curled in the cold air. She sat beside him. You never told me what they did to you. He was silent for a long while. Then with a voice so low it was almost wind, he whispered, hung me, but the ropes snapped. Eliza's breath caught. He cradled Jed closer, thought I was dead, left me for the crows, but the horse stayed. Found me, waited. That's how the marshal found us. He finally looked at her. That's why I don't talk. Not 'cause I can't, because I won't let them take my voice again. Not until I have something worth saying. Eliza placed her hand on his. You just did. He nodded. Then leaned in, forehead against hers. They're coming again, Eliza. Not just thugs. The ones who gave the orders. The ones with clean hands and filthy hearts. Then we'll be ready. They'll burn this whole valley to get to me. Then we'll make 'em regret every match they ever struck. Colt smiled. You're fiercer than any man I've known. She looked down at Jed. He'll be braver than both of us. 2 days later, a rider arrived. Alone. Unarmed. He wore a fine coat and a silver brooch shaped like a hawk. He introduced himself with a bow. Julian Blackstone, envoy for the Consortium of Western Holdings. Eliza raised an eyebrow. Not a fancy name for land. Thieves? He chuckled. Some might say. I prefer investors in frontier progress. Colt stood silent beside her. Blackstone gestured behind him. You've made quite the home here. Built on blood, some say. Eliza crossed her arms. Built on survival. There's a difference. Blackstone nodded. Be that as it may, there's concern that the presence of certain individuals invites unwanted attention. Colt stepped forward, just once. Blackstone's smile faltered. We're offering relocation, compensation, safe passage to the east. Where? Not leaving, Eliza said. If you stay, it won't be a negotiation next time. Colt handed Blackstone a small carving. A wolf, its mouth open, teeth bared. Blackstone took it, frowned. Consider this your last warning. He turned his horse and left. Eliza exhaled. How long do we have? Colt carved a number into the snow with his boot. 3.3 days. To prepare. To say their goodbyes. Or to turn the ranch into a fortress. They chose the latter. The siege would come. And when it did, they would not kneel. Because when you have nothing, you learn how to survive. But when you have something worth dying for, you learn how to fight. Snow fell like a slow death the day the men came. The wind bit through coats. The trees stood still as if holding their breath. The sky was a heavy blanket of gray, pressing low over the valley, muting sound and light alike. Eliza held Jed close. Wrapped in wool and prayers. Nora was in the root cellar with Elias, a shotgun across her knees. Colt stood on the porch, rifle in hand, gaze fixed on the far tree line. They came on black horses, 7 riders, all in gray coats, faces hidden. No flags, no crests, no mercy. Julian Blackstone rode at the front. He smiled as he approached. Told you we'd come back. Colt didn't speak. Eliza stepped beside him. You're trespassing. You're harboring a killer. We're protecting our home. Blackstone sighed. This doesn't have to end in blood. Colt lowered the rifle slightly. Blackstone smiled wider. Then Colt fired. The bullet tore through Blackstone's coat. He dropped from the saddle like a rag doll. 6 others drew weapons. Gunfire erupted. Eliza dragged Jed inside and dove for the cellar door. Colt took 2 down before they reached the barn. A 3rd made it to the porch. Colt met him with a knife. They struggled, fists in steel, boots crunching over ice. Eliza saw blood. But Colt stood tall. Another rider fell in the pasture. Nora's shot. Sharp and sure. Only 2 left. 1 circled behind the shed. Eliza handed Jed to Elias, whispered a prayer, and grabbed the rifle. She flanked wide. Found him lighting a fuse. No! She shouted. He turned. Too late. Her shot hit true. The fire died in his hands. 1 left. The last one charged. Straight for the house. Colt, limping now, met him halfway. The fight was brutal. They crashed through the corral, rolled over snow and mud. And memory. The man slammed Colt's head against a fence post. Eliza screamed. Colt kicked the man off, grabbed the carving blade from his belt, drove it deep. The man gasped. Went. Still, silence returned. Eliza ran to Colt, blood from his temple, but alive. It's over, she whispered. He shook his head, then pointed to the hills. In the distance, a new figure watched. Tall, still, face hidden behind a mask of bone. Then it turned, vanished into the trees. They buried the bodies far from the house. This time, Colt didn't mark the graves. Eliza stood beside him, arms wrapped tight around Jed. Who was that? The one watching? Colt carved a single word into the snow. End. She frowned. What does that mean? He looked to the baby. Then back to her. Carved again. When he's ready. She shivered. You think this is all for him? That there. Waiting for ... our son? Colt didn't answer. He didn't have to. Winter held them tight for another month. The ranch healed slowly. Boards replaced. Scars cleaned. Walls patched. Colt carved Jed immobile stars, wolves, horses. It spun above the cradle like a quiet spell. Eliza sang again. Not for the past, not for the pain, but for the future. Sometimes Colt joined her. Only in whispers. Only in dreams. But it was enough. One morning, as the first buds bloomed in defiance of the cold, Colt led Eliza to the hill behind the house. He had cleared the brush, built a bench, carved into the wood. June's rest. She sat beside him, watched the sun rise, watched Jed crawl in the grass, watched Colt reach for her hand. The wind was kind that day. And though they both knew the road ahead would twist again, that the shadows would return and the past might claw, its way free, for that moment, they were whole. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the ones who are broken don't need fixing. They just need a place to build something better. Together. And love, when born in the blood and silence of survival, is the fiercest kind of all. Spring crept in without fanfare. Like a guest who wasn't sure they were welcome, the frost retreated slowly from the earth, revealing bruised grass and the brittle remains of last year's harvest. Crocuses bloomed in clusters by the edge of the barn. The chickens laid more eggs. The days stretched longer. Jed took his first steps in the doorway between the kitchen and the porch, lurching from Eliza to Colt like a drunken soldier with too much courage and not enough balance. Colt caught him. Always. They didn't cheer, didn't shout, but the pride in their eyes could have lit the stove without firewood. They heard no more from the riders. No letters, no threats, no bone-masked watcher on the ridge, but the silence felt like a held breath. Colt spent evenings reinforcing. The barn walls. Eliza practiced with the rifle every third morning. Jed was always watched, always guarded, because even peace, once broken, carries the scent of its own fragility. One day, Nora returned from a supply run to Ridge, hollow with a newspaper tucked under her arm. She slapped it onto the table and pointed at the headline, Mass Grave Discovered. Federal Marshal Investigates Consortiums. Ties to Frontier Atrocities. Eliza read in silence. Bodies. Dozens of them. Found near old holdings run by Julian Blackstone's investors. Colt leaned over her shoulder. His face remained still, but his fists tightened. The article named names, and Colt's wasn't one of them. Nora looked at him. They're cleaning house. Burning files, but not all of them. Eliza folded the paper. You thinking what I'm thinking? Colt didn't move. Then he turned to the shed, returned with a box. He hadn't opened since the fall. Inside, maps, names, ledgers in a language only. Colt seemed to understand. If they're exposed, Eliza said, maybe it's time to finish it. Colt nodded. He carved one word into the table. Justice. Preparations began quietly. Colt taught Nora and Elias how to read the maps, how to track a convoy, how to disappear into a crowd and come back with truth in your pocket. Eliza wrote letters to contacts she hadn't spoken to in years, women who'd ridden with her during the famine, farmers who still owed her favors, old soldiers with axes to grind. The network formed fast, because when the powerful rot, the hungry will rise, and the righteous don't need swords, just resolve. Yet second birthday passed with stew, cornbread, and a new hand-carved rocking horse. Colt spent the evening brushing clover and staring at the mountains. Eliza joined him. You thinking about leaving? He nodded once. For how long? He carved. Until it's done. She touched his face. Come back. He pressed his forehead to hers, then walked inside and kissed Jed on the forehead for the first time. Colt left the next morning. No goodbyes. Just a quiet saddle, packed food, and a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. Eliza watched him ride down the ridge. Nora came beside her. He'll come back. He better. He still owes me a dance. They laughed and cried and went inside. Months passed. Letters arrived. Short-coated. Eliza read them beside the stove. Read them aloud to Jed, though he didn't understand. But someday he would. One read, Denver, clear, file seized. Names turned. Another, Kansas City silent, but watching. And then, midnight, Blackstone's ledger, delivered. Each word was a nail in a coffin built from secrets. Then one day, no letter came. And the next. Eliza waited 6 weeks. Until one morning, a rider approached the gate. Young, dusty, familiar badge. You Eliza Cordell? She nodded. Man named Colt asked me to deliver this. Said if he didn't come back, you'd know what to do. He handed her a bundle, wrapped in oilcloth. Heavy. Inside. A carving. Jed. Smiling. On the back, scrawled in ink. If I fall, let him rise. Don't let the silence win. Eliza closed her eyes, felt the wind shift, then stood, walked inside, lit the lantern, and began writing. Because stories don't end in silence, not when they're still burning. The summer that followed came with long golden evenings and a silence so deep it felt earned. For the first time in years, Eliza let herself breathe. No distant, HOOFBEATS. No letters nailed to doors. No fires in the sky. Jed took to the fields like he was born from the land. He'd wander through the tall grass, fists full of wildflowers, always just barely in sight. Colt would watch him from the porch, a carving in his lap, always shaping something small, something delicate. Eliza began tending the garden again. Squash, carrots, tomatoes in neat rows. The soil was richer than it had any right to be, after so much blood had been spilled over it. Maybe that was the cost of peace. One afternoon, Colt brought home a guest. An old woman, hunched and cloaked, her eyes sharp as broken glass. She said her name was Wren. She didn't ask for food or shelter. She asked to see Jed. Eliza bristled. Why? Wren smiled, all gums. Because the world's still turning, and it doesn't turn kindly. That boy of yours is going to need to know how to stand still when the wind howls. Colt didn't stop her. So Eliza watched. For 2 days, Wren taught Jed how to trace runes in the dirt with a stick. She whispered stories about wolves who walked as men, about songs that could still the heart of thunder, about a mountain that remembered every footprint ever left upon it. Jed listened, eyes wide, silent. When she left, she gave Colt a pouch of black sand. For when silence isn't enough. Then she was gone. That autumn Elias left, not out of anger or fear, but because he needed to see what lay beyond the ridges. You gave me life again, he told Eliza. Now I need to see what I can build with it. She hugged him hard. Nora wept. Colt gave him a carving of a compass. Jed handed him a feather. They watched him ride out at dawn. He didn't look back. That meant he believed he'd see them again. Nora stayed. She started her own small barn near the edge of the creek. Took in 2 orphaned goats and a half-wild pup that adored Jed. She stopped wearing the scar around her neck and began writing a book. Just in case, she told Eliza. Just in case the world forgets again. Eliza helped her bind the pages. Colt carved the cover, a single word, testimony. Then came the letter, wrapped in cloth, bound with red thread. Eliza opened it by lantern light. Only 5 words. It wasn't the last time. She read it twice, then handed it to Colt. He didn't flinch, didn't. Carved. Just nodded. Eliza placed the letter into the stove, watched it burn. Not today, she whispered. Not this time. On Yet's 3rd birthday, they held a fire, invited everyone they could reach. Neighbors, traders, writers, from miles out who owed Colt favors he never called in. Music echoed in the valley, laughter, dancing. Eliza wore a blue dress she hadn't dared to for years. Colt wore a smile. He danced with her beneath the stars, slow and swaying. His lips brushed her ear. We made it, she leaned in. For now. That night, after the fire died and the guests slept in tents, beneath the sky, Jed woke crying. Eliza found him on the porch, staring at the moon. Bad dream? He nodded. She lifted him into her arms. What was it about? He placed his small hand over her heart. Loud men, and you weren't there. She rocked him gently. Colt stepped out, wrapped them both in his coat. Jed looked at him. You scared them away, right, Papa? Colt didn't speak, but he held them both, and that was answer enough. The next morning, Eliza woke to find a new carving on the table. A tree. Tall. Unshaken. Its roots deep. Its branches spread. At the base. 2 smaller trees. One reaching, one growing. She placed it above the hearth. Beside the old ones, because the past would always live there. But now, the future had a place too. 3 years passed. The valley grew lush again. The rains returned on time. The soil softened. The apple trees bore fruit. Jed grew tall. Colt grew gray. Eliza grew wiser. The ranch thrived, but quietly. They kept to themselves, never flaunted, never forgot. The land remembered. And so did they. On the morning of Yet's 6th birthday, he woke before the sun and ran to the hill behind the house. He sat on June's bench, legs dangling, breath misting. In the cool air. Colt found him there, holding the old carving, the one of the tree with its deep roots and wide branches. It's my favorite, Jed said, because you made it for us. Colt smiled, slow and warm. Then, he pointed to the ridge. A shape moved there, not a threat. A rider, hooded. Not close, just watching. Colt didn't reach for a weapon. He just watched back. After a while, the rider turned and disappeared over the rise. Jed looked up. They always come, don't they? Colt nodded. Jed asked, Will I have to fight them one day? Colt placed a hand on his shoulder, then pointed to the tree line, to the garden below, to the barn where horses waited, to the house where Eliza sang. He carved one word into the dirt: choice. Jed stared at it, then nodded. Later that summer, Eliza found an old box tucked beneath the floorboards in the barn. Inside, letters, drawings, a lock of blonde hair wrapped in faded ribbon. Names she didn't recognize. She brought it to Colt. He opened it slowly. He didn't speak. But that night, he added a new name to the ledger Nora kept. Lena. No surname. No date. Just a name. Eliza didn't ask. But she lit a candle for her anyway. Some things didn't need telling to be felt. In the fall, Nora took a trip east to visit Elias. She returned weeks later with stories of cities that never slept, trains that screamed across mountains, and people who'd never tasted silence. Jed listened. Wide-I. Colt listened too, not out of curiosity, but out of caution, because silence was sacred now, and they had paid dearly for it. One morning, a stranger knocked on their door. Not a rider, not a ghost, just a man in a brown coat, carrying a canvas bag. He introduced himself as Thorne. He said he was writing a book. About redemption, he said. About the West and the people who bled for it. Colt stepped forward, didn't speak. Thorne nodded. I know who you are. I know what you did. And I want to tell the story right. Not just the killing, but the healing. Eliza hesitated. Then nodded. For 3 days, Thorne stayed. He listened. Took notes. He cried when Eliza told him about the fire. He laughed when Jed showed him how to track rabbits. He stayed up late talking with Nora. On the 4th day, he left. He promised to write truthfully. They believed him, because for the first time in a long while, the world seemed ready to listen. On the first snowfall of the 7th year, Colt fell ill. Not sudden. Violent. Just a quiet slowness. A tiredness he couldn't shake. Eliza sat with him by the fire. Jed held his hand. Colt carved less, slept more. One evening, he gave Eliza a small box. Inside, one last carving, a pair of hands holding flame on the bottom. Keep him warm, keep him safe. She cried. He smiled, then whispered something only she could hear, then closed his eyes, and didn't open them again. They buried him beneath the tree line. Beside June. The bench now read, Rest easy, old soul. You kept your promise. Nora carved it herself. Jed left a carving of his own, a horse. Standing watch. That winter was quiet. Snow deep. Stars close. Eliza sang again, not for grief, but for love, because love, even when it's gone, never leaves empty rooms. It leaves light, and light is what brings people home. Years later, the stories told around the valley fire pits always circled back to them, the mute cowboy and the woman who bought him like a broken tool and forged a legend instead. Jed was nearly 16 when he first asked the full story. He and Eliza sat on the porch beneath a wide pink dusk, the rocking chairs creaking slowly in rhythm with the cicadas. Mama, he said, voice cracking just slightly with the ache of becoming a man. What really happened the day you brought Papa home? Eliza smiled, closed her eyes. She saw the dust again. The auction yard, the broken man, the quiet horse. The world before it all shifted. I didn't buy a man that day, she said softly. I bought silence, and inside that silence was the loudest life I'd ever live. Jed frowned. That doesn't make sense, she chuckled. It will. When you're older, or when the world breaks your heart the first time. He looked down at his hands, calloused, wide, strong like his father's. Did he ever really speak again? Eliza nodded. Once, just once. What did he say? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small carved figure. Jed took it. It was a flame. He said, Eliza whispered, that if we could keep this burning, then no one could ever say he died with regret. Jed turned the flame in his fingers. And did we? Keep it burning? Eliza looked toward the hills, where the tree line now hid the resting place of the man who had once faced 7 riders with nothing but grit and silence. We're still here, aren't we? That night, Jed stood by the corral, watching the stars. The air smelled of dust and coming rain. Clover's colt paced along the fence. Young and unsure, he thought of all the things his father had never said aloud, and all the ones he'd spoken through his hands. Then he opened the pouch. Colt had left him a bundle untouched for years. Inside were 6 carvings, each a symbol, each a promise. STAR, a knife, a flame, a tree, a pair of hands, and the last, a horse, carved so precisely it seemed ready to leap from his palm. Jed held it, high against the moonlight. I'm ready now, he whispered. No answer came, but the wind stirred, and that was enough. 2 weeks later, Eliza found Yet's note on the kitchen table. Gone to see what else this silence holds. I'll be back, I promise. She didn't cry, just folded the note and placed it in the box with Colt's carvings. Then she walked out to the porch and sat, watched the road, waited for the sun. Years passed, the ranch grew. The trees spread. Children came and went. Neighbors leaned on them through hard seasons. Nora passed, buried beside the barn. Elias returned once, older, smiling, with stories of cities that had forgotten what dust tasted like. Eliza aged slowly, never remarried. Never stopped carving, and every birthday, a new package arrived, wrapped in canvas, marked only with a flame inside. A carving, a memory, a promise. Jed was out there, carving his way through the world, piece by piece. When Eliza finally passed, peaceful, warm, surrounded by light, her last request was simple. Put me next to him, and make sure the tree still stands. And they did. The carving of the tree, now worn smooth by time and touch, was mounted on a post beside the grave. The valley grew quiet again, but not empty. Because stories like theirs don't vanish. They take root. And every now and then, a traveler still rides through that part of the West and stops at a quiet ranch where the wind sings. They'll see a carving nailed to a door, a single word colon home. And they'll know they've found it. Because love, real love, carved in silence and built with blood, never fades. It just waits to be passed on.